It's the final lesson of the Nile Rodgers series, and I've definitely saved a good one till last because it's the super popular track Get Lucky by Daft Punk. This is a great song to jam along to and a really good one to play at gigs as well. It serves as a solid platform for experimenting with some chord embellishments and variations in your strumming patterns, and there's also some cool single note lines layered on top as well. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the theory because there's some interesting stuff going on. Remember, you can download diagrams for all the chords used in this series via my Patreon page, and you can also access the full Nile Rodgers lesson playlist via the links in the description. In the first lesson of the series, I go through a bunch of his chords and techniques and knowledge that he uses to help prepare you for these song lessons, so I definitely advise checking that one out. But without further ado, let's get stuck in. So let's start with the main progression, and it's just a simple repeating 4-chord progression throughout the whole song. If you're comfortable with your major and minor bar chords and some of your sevenths, there shouldn't be anything new or too difficult here for you. But if there are any chords that you're unsure about, do check out the first video in this series where I go over a bunch of Nile Rodgers chords that he uses, and also consider downloading the diagrams from my Patreon page via the link in the description. So for Get Lucky, we have got a B minor 7 rooted on the bottom string, 7th fret. So if you're unsure about your sevenths, just start with a normal B minor chord. Then remove the little finger, make sure you can hear the first finger bar on the D string, and that'll give you your minor 7 chord. Next, we've got a D chord using an A shape, so rooted on the 5th fret of the A string. Pretty standard D chord. Then we're sliding up to an F sharp minor 7. So first finger's going to stay on the A string but slide up to the 9th fret. If you start with just a normal A minor shape chord, that will give you just an F sharp minor. And then just like with the B minor, take off the little finger and that'll give you the 7th. Again, make sure you can hear that first finger bar. And then the final chord is an E major, so we're sliding down 2 frets and throwing in that A major shape again. And then we repeat again from the B minor 7. So we've got that B minor 7, 2, 3, 4, D, 2, 3, 4, F sharp minor 7, 2, 3, 4, E, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. And that's the harmonic progression that goes throughout the entire song. So let's get into the rhythm side of things now. Now I'm going to show you a specific rhythm which can be used as the main theme of the song. This is sort of what you hear when the song first starts, but I definitely want you to feel like you can vary it up and embellish it just as you're feeling it. So I'll show you some variations as well to get you started, but maybe start with this main theme as like a specific pattern to work with, and then try and change it up a little bit when you get used to it. So the rhythm that we're going to be using sounds like this. And there's a couple of things in there which we've seen already in this Nile Rodgers series. The first of them being these 3-note sequences. So the 3-note sequence in this one is 2 muted strums followed by 1 fretted strum. So you can hear that every 3rd strum is the one where you hear the chord. Now the interesting thing about it being groups of 3, because it's an odd number, is that it flips the strumming direction each time. So we're going down, up, down on the first one. So the fretted strum ends up being a down, but then because the hand is down the bottom of the guitar, the next 3 will be up, down, up. So the fretted strum is constantly changing between a down strum and an up strum. So we've got down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. That happens 4 times in a row in the first bar, and then at the end we're doing 2 fretted strums, and then 2 muted strums followed by 2 fretted strums. So the ending will be... Okay, so we've got our 4 groups of 3. Then 2 muted, 2 fretted. And then the start of the next bar starts with the 2 muted strums, and that's your opportunity to change to the next chord. So if I just do those first 2 bars, and then you can see at what point my hand starts changing to the D chord. And also really important when you're changing that you keep the fingers resting on the strings so you don't get this strings ringing out, which you can sometimes get away with when you're doing kind of open chord strummy stuff. But in this one, you want to keep it nice and tight sounding and percussive. So if we apply that strumming pattern to all the chords, we'll get this. But as I mentioned, you want to be able to vary up and come up with some new ideas. Quite a good one to start with is just to do more fretted strums. So I have this idea that I kind of consistently do in this song where I throw in 4 fretted strums all at once. So in the first bar that would sound like this. And I really try and accent. You can hear them 4 fretted strums really clearly. Just adds a little bit more energy. It's a really easy one to throw in kind of wherever you feel like it. You can put it on any chord. Trying to throw in even more strums on that E chord at the end, just to give it a bit more variation and a bit more momentum going into the next cycle of the chord progression. Always the key thing when it comes to funk strumming is that you keep the right arm moving all the time and stick to that 16th note grid. So long as you've got that and you're listening closely to the track and paying attention to the groove, pretty much anything you come up with should sound pretty good. But just have a bit of a play about with it, try and get comfortable and try and gain a little bit of freedom with your strumming so you're not stuck to specific patterns. Okay, next let's talk about some of the embellishments that you can throw in with regards to the actual chord shapes. And we'll start with the F sharp minor 7, because this is quite a good one. The first thing that I would try and do is start with the first finger barring on its own and try and hammer the other fingers down, so you get this sound. It's a really nice, cool sound. You might recognize it from other songs. It's quite a good example. But if I put it in this sequence, so I'm doing it a couple of times in the bar there. Just a nice way to add a little bit of more melodic movement within your chords. You can kind of throw it in wherever it feels right. Again, you got to experiment with this stuff and see what works and what doesn't. Also in the F sharp minor 7, you can experiment with throwing the little finger onto the 12th fret of the top string. This doesn't actually change the chord, it just doubles the 7th an octave higher. So it's quite an easy one to throw in because you're not going to end up playing like a note that's out of key or anything like that. So you get this sound. And if you take it off, you get this little melody on top. So you can play around with having these. So if I play it like that, you kind of hear in this melody. So again, it's another way of taking the progression one step further than just the basic chords and making it a little bit more interesting for the listener and adding some of those variations. Moving on to the E chord now. A really cool, really easy embellishment that you can do is the sus4. So for this, all you're doing is placing the little finger on the next fret up on the B string, so that'll be the 10th fret in this case. A little bit like the little finger on the top of the F sharp minor 7, this is a really easy one just to throw in wherever you feel like it. Towards the end of the progression is quite a good place to throw in this one because you can create a bit of tension with the sus4 sound and then resolve it back to the E and then move to the B minor again. So that's quite a cool sound. Another cool idea you can throw in on the E chord is this Hendrix style embellishment, which sounds like this. So a little bit more technique involved in this one. We're starting with the normal A shape for the E chord. And what we're going to do is we're going to roll the 3rd finger onto the A string, which is going to remain on the 9th fret. We're going to pick that string and slide up 2 frets to the 11th. And now the 1st finger is going to fill in the bar that the 3rd finger was previously playing. So that's the 9th fret on the D, G and B strings. And we end up with this nice little first inversion of the E chord. You could also think of it as coming from the G shape. So if I pop the little finger on the 12th fret root, that would be a G shape chord if you know the cage system. But we're just playing the inversion. So a nice easy one to get into from this A shape. 3rd finger goes over, pick and slide up, bar the other 3 strings. Now this is a tricky one to integrate into the strumming because you've got to make sure all the correct strings are muted. So if I throw the strumming back in, quite tricky to get right. You've got to play around, figure out how you can keep each string quiet that you don't want to ring out, and then you know, try and make it natural, get it into the muscle memory. And another little kind of finisher you can throw in, that nice little lick at the end there. What I'm doing here, after I've done the slide up and I'm into the inversion, I'm trying to aim for just the middle 2 strings barred by the 1st finger, although it's not the end of the world if you catch the B string as well, but aiming mainly for those middle 2 strings. And I'm going to hammer the 3rd finger down onto the 11th fret of the D string, then pull it off again, then it moves back down to the A string, and then you, if you want to, you can slide back down to that normal A shape. If you're throwing it in at the very end of the pattern, you've kind of got to get back to the B minor straight away. So that would be... So you're using them initial couple of muted strums to get back to the start of the pattern. But that's just a few ideas for embellishments that you can throw into this progression, both rhythmically and melodically. It might be worth going back and looking at some of the previous videos in this series and seeing what other embellishments that he throws in on these types of chords. And then whenever you're using bar chords and, you know, minor 7th chords and things like that, you've got these embellishments available and you can add them to your repertoire and throw them in wherever you feel like it, and, you know, experiment to see where they work and where they don't work, and kind of get a bit of a natural understanding of when you can throw in different embellishments of these chord variations. And that just helps keep your rhythm playing more interesting, helps you progress as a guitar player. Now the other part to this song is a single note line which goes like this. That part's actually played by a session player called Paul Jackson Jr. He worked with Michael Jackson and other amazing artists, so we've got 2 session players in this tune with just like incredible careers and experience, and, you know, really good ability to write guitar parts for songs. So I think that's why it works so well, even though it's just that one repeating progression. There's a great video that you can watch of Paul Jackson Jr. playing along to some of his classic tracks on YouTube, which is definitely worth checking out. But in terms of this part, we've just got little single note lines, and it's important to make sure you get the clicky muted notes in between. So if I play it without the clicky muted notes first so you can hear just the melody, that would sound like this. Obviously it's just outlining the same 4 chords that we had in the main progression. If I put the clicky notes back in, then it's got its percussive quality back as well as the melody. So what we're doing here is starting on the B minor chord. I play this rooted on the A string, but you can also play it rooted on the bottom string. It's the same shape in either position. We're going to start with the 2nd fret, 1st finger. Then 3rd finger is going to play 4th fret on the D string. And then 3rd finger is going to play 4th fret on the G string. So we're like outlining a B power chord here. We've got a couple of notes on that G string. Then 1st finger playing the 2nd fret. Then back to 3rd finger playing D string. So we've got... And it's important to get that rhythm as well. As I say, you can play it over here, kind of rooted on the bottom string. Exactly the same shape, it just depends whether you'd rather keep all the notes on the same bunch of strings or in the same sort of position. Whatever feels more comfortable to you. And then if you put the muted notes in, so what I'm doing here is I'm trying to keep the right hand moving and still picking the strings, and I'm just relaxing the fingers in the left hand so that they're not fully fretting down the notes. So rather than getting, I'm getting. So I'm making sure I'm only actually putting pressure on the string when I want to hear a note from the melody. And I'm not going to go into too many specifics as to what's an up pick and what's a down pick, because it's likely to change every time you play it. A little bit like the main progression, you want to be able to add some variations to these parts and maybe play about with the rhythm and the feel of it ever so slightly. Moving on to the D chord part of this single note riff, we're starting with 1st finger on the 5th fret of the A, 3rd finger on the 7th fret of the D, then 3rd finger onto the 7th fret of the G. So again, we're outlining that power chord shape. But the only difference here is rather than copying the shape exactly and going 7, 5, 7, that sounds a little bit dodgy in this key, we're going to go 7, 6, 7. So it's got a slightly more majory type sound to it. Just following the key of the song there. You can use different fingers to play this if it's more comfortable. So sometimes I'll use 3rd, 2nd, 3rd at the end. Sometimes I'll kind of squeeze the hand in and go 3rd, 1st, 3rd, or 3rd, 1st, 2nd, or even just move the position completely and go 2nd, 1st, 2nd. Honestly, just go with whatever feels natural to you. You can play it loads of different ways. The important thing is that you keep the little clicky muted notes in there and keep following the contour of the melody. So far we've got... That's the B minor and the D chord sorted. Now we're going to take that shape from the B minor, but we're going to root it up on the F sharp, so up on the 9th fret of the A, and it's exactly the same pattern that we had on the B, so you can literally just copy and paste. And then actually same on the E. So that's just exactly the same thing, 2 frets down. So the B minor, the F sharp minor and the E are all the same. You've just got to remember on the D, you've got that one note where it's a 1 fret gap rather than a 2 fret gap to follow the key. So the whole thing, we've got B minor, D, F sharp minor, E. As I mentioned, you might want to start with just the melody first. And then try putting in some of the percussive stuff afterwards. And the final thing I want to touch on in this lesson is what you can do if you're a single guitar player in a band and you haven't got like any extra accompaniment like a keyboard or anything like that. So in my band we're a 4-piece with a singer who just sings, doesn't play guitar. So it's literally instrument wise it's just me, the bass player and the drummer. So when we play this song, the problem with going from this big strumming part where you've got straight into this is it quietens down the song quite a lot, and it sort of forces you into like a breakdown section where the bass player and the drummer have got to lower their dynamics as well. If they're still hitting really hard and you go from the big strumming into just the single note picking and it's all muted, you know, palm muted, and you're kind of playing it on your own, it can really kill the vibe of the song and force you to change into like a breakdown, which you might not necessarily want. So one kind of way to combat that I've found is to incorporate this single note into a strumming pattern as well. So that sounds like this. So it sounds a little bit different, but it's my way of sort of blending the two parts so that if you're in a band, you don't have to lower the dynamics every time. And it sounds really good to come in with that part when you come out of like a chorus. I tend to find it sounds pretty good with a bit of phaser on as well, kind of gives it sort of like a bit of a, I don't know, a little bit of a different vibe, a little bit more sonically interesting. And it just means you can keep the energy level up and not be forced into that breakdown. So what's going on here, I'm omitting the A string notes in this one. So I'm not playing the root note, I'm just leaving that up to the bass player. I'm starting with 2 notes on the D string instead. Just find it easier to get the mute in there, and then the end of the melody is exactly the same. Because you're strumming pretty much all the strings, you've got to be pretty good with the muting. It's very similar to the little Hendrixy thing we had before. Same thing moving up to the D, starting on the D string, and remember you've got to keep that 1 fret gap rather than 2 fret gap on the G string. Back to the F sharp minor, which is the same shape as the B. And then quite often what I'll do is I'll start the E chord part on the G string and I'll do lots of fretted strums. And then finish the melody normally. Just find that has quite a cool effect. So that sounds like this. And you might also notice that sometimes I'm starting on the beat of the bar, sometimes I'm not. I'm not being too strict about it. Again, you want to have a bit of freedom and be able to vary it up and kind of just go with how you're feeling the song. But yeah, that was just a little bit of an idea if you are in a position where you're playing this in a band and you're the only guitar player. Hopefully it'll give you a few more options and you won't get frustrated with having to kill the dynamics every time you change section. And finally, I just want to have a little bit of a discussion about the theory and the harmonic analysis of this song. This is a really good one to dive into because it's such a popular song and it's such a good example of the Dorian mode. Now, I spoke a little bit about this in the first lesson of the series where I sort of talked, like, give an overview of his theory and techniques and things. But the Dorian mode comes about when you're in a minor key, but the 4 chord is major. So if we look at the chords that we've got, we're in the key of B minor. So we're starting with that B minor 7, the root chord. The D major is the 3rd, which is what you'd expect. The F sharp minor is the 5th, which is what you'd expect. You'd expect 1, 4 and 5 to be minor in a natural minor key. But rather than going down to an E minor, which sounds kind of odd now that we're used to that other progression, we want to make it major instead. So what's happening here is this note, which would be the minor 3rd of E, the note G, becomes G sharp, barred by the 3rd finger, and that changes the mode that we're playing from a natural minor or Aeolian mode into a B Dorian mode. Now, if you're not too comfortable with all this theory talk, the Dorian mode comes about when you have a minor scale with a raised 6th degree. So if I play the B minor scale, I'd be counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 6th note would normally be that G note. But instead, we're going to swap it out for the G sharp. That's our raised 6th, and you can see that note in the E major chord. Barred underneath the 3rd finger on the B string there. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, raised 6th, then 7, and then the root again. That's the Dorian scale. But the important thing here is the relationship between the chord and the scale. Lots of people think of modes as purely just being a scale thing that you would practice over like a 1-chord vamp, but actually modes are really good for chord progressions and they make a big difference. If I play it without the Dorian effect, it just doesn't have that same vibe. It doesn't have that kind of upbeat, uplifting, kind of cool, groovy effect that having the E major does. It just sounds so much better in the funk context. So yeah, that tends to be why when I'm introducing students to modes and how modes work in terms of chord patterns, this is a regular reference that I use. This and Boulevard of Broken Dreams by Green Day does the same thing. So maybe check that one out as well if you're interested in this kind of chord theory analysis modal stuff. But yeah, I just definitely thought it was worth mentioning. You could definitely use these chords to improvise the B Dorian scale over. That would sound really cool. And you'd want to be aiming for that note, the raised sixth, on top of the E chord. That would sound really cool and really sound like you know what you're doing. And then when you start practicing it and playing it, you start recognizing it with your ear. And then when you come across it in another song, you start to think, oh, that sounds like the Dorian mode. And it makes it easier to learn songs and recognize sounds. And then you can, you know, it's easier to write good melodies and learn songs and just generally helps your musicianship in a big way. So yeah, I thought that would be worth mentioning in this video. I hope you've enjoyed taking a look at this modern classic, and if you followed through with all the lessons, I really hope you've enjoyed this Nile Rodgers series. I had a great time transcribing all the songs and kind of getting into his mindset and figuring out all the little things that really make his guitar playing sound like him, so I'll definitely be diving into some more artist series soon. Remember, you can download diagrams for all the chords used in this series from my Patreon page, and you can also get the drum track from the medley that I played in the first video in this series, so if you have learned all the songs, it might be worth giving that a go yourself. You can access the full Nile Rodgers playlist via the link below in the description. I'm going to be adding a lot more videos to the channel, including some more structured courses, so if you do enjoy these lessons and find them helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel, and hopefully I'll see you in another lesson soon.